Hi, everybody. I'm here again with Algebra 1. I'm going to be doing the B3, which is evaluate variable expressions involving integers. We're going to have a variable in there and simplify the expressions. You can see I'm still in the B section. I've got my baboon behind me. So let's get started with B3. Let's see. Evaluate the expression for m equals -12. This is a tough one. A lot of people get confused because they see the negative in front of the m. One way to read that is the opposite of m. And the best option for anytime you're dealing with a variable expression is to substitute inside parentheses. So negative m literally means I'm going to replace the m with the -12. And this says the opposite of -12, which is +12. And so we put the 12 in. And now we have 6 plus 9, 6 plus 9, which is 15. One of the things you'll notice I don't do is I don't like to write the equal sign, because if you write an equal sign, it looks like you may be making an equation, which is different than an expression. In this particular case, this expression is 15. Now this one, again, we have a negative h, so negative h plus 8, and I'm substituting inside parentheses, which is -6. We have that double negative, which makes 6 plus 8, or 14. Let's see if I can speed it up a little bit for you. Okay, so -8. Now notice that there's a j there and there's no operation apparent. When you see a variable next to a number, we call this number its coefficient, and this is being multiplied. And that's -8j. I guess I should write it. I substitute, and the parenthesis does mean multiply. So this is a +8. A -8 times a -1 is a +8. -12 plus 13 is 1. Oh, guess it helps if I actually submit it. There we go. Can't write it in. Oh, we have an absolute value. This says the absolute value of 17 plus 66. Now, normally I'd put the parentheses, but in this particular case, it's going to be a lot easier and a lot simpler to not have extra parentheses all over the place. The 17 and the 66 makes 83. And the absolute value of 83 is still just 83. Absolute value just means make it positive. 83. Oh, this one's much more interesting. So we have an absolute value. We have a -8 minus 60. The h is 60, and we are subtracting these. But again, I like to think of subtraction as adding the opposite. -8 plus -60 is -68, and we're taking the absolute value. This is the distance from 0 on the number line, or the positive part. So it's always positive when you take the absolute value, 68. Oh, I like this one. RST means we're multiplying R times S times T, and we're adding R. And we've got a -8 times -1 times T, which is -11, plus the R, which is the -8. These are getting multiplied together, so we've got -88 plus -8, which is 96. and it's negative. A negative plus a negative is a negative. Negative 96. Don't use your calculator unless you need it. We want to find the square root of 2 times 11 plus 14. Notice I substituted the 11 instead of the h. The square root behaves like a parenthesis, so you have to do what's inside first. You have to multiply 22 plus the 14, which is the square root of 36, which happens to be 6. Now, a lot of people are confused because they know that if they're solving, they get a positive or a negative square root. And it is true that negative 6 times itself is 36. But when we talk about the square root, we're talking about just the positive part. So this is just the 6, the positive square root. This one is negative 19 plus negative 38 plus 4 times 8. Sorry, that's a 4 right there. And we can add these two together. We know we're going to multiply this and get the 32 plus negative 38 plus negative 19. And I want to point something out right here. A lot of people are going to multiply or add the negative 19 with the negative 38, and then they're going to add 32. But for me, it looks a lot easier to add this negative 38 with the positive 32, which is negative 6, and then add that to the negative 19. It just seems easier to me. That's going to be negative 25, and I'll put it in. Now we've got a 4 and a y squared and a z, and those are being multiplied together. We have to square the negative 1 first, and it is important that you do that first. Notice if I multiplied these together and then squared it, I would get 16. But in this particular case, when I square negative 1, I get 4 times 1 times 19. And when we multiply those together, it looks like it's 76 maybe. All I did was multiply the 4 times the 10 and get the 40, and the 4 times the 9 and add the 36 in my head, in case you're wondering how I do that. That is 76. Now this one is g times h. So we're talking about 8 times negative 8 minus h. Again, we have that double negative there. Whenever I see a negative and a negative together like that, it really means plus 8. This is negative 64 plus 8, which is negative 56. And we're done. Oh, absolute value, nice. Absolute value of p, which is 32, plus negative 52. I normally put parentheses around these, but we've already got the absolute values, which kind of behave like parentheses. You do have to do what's inside first, which means to get the sum of these two, which is negative 20. Remember that the negative 52 is 20 larger than the positive 32. So I like to think of this as who wins. The negatives win by 20. And the absolute value of negative 20 is positive 20. Oh, h, negative 75. Again, I like, it's getting inside parentheses as it is, so I'm just going to leave it alone. 69 quantity squared. And when you add those together, you get negative 6 squared, which is 36. We have a square root of n plus m. N is 11 plus m is 5. And again, I could put parentheses around these, but it gets confusing looking. It's supposed to be a parenthesis there. But we know that that's 16, and we're taking the square root, which is just the positive square root, which is 4. Negative 67. I said 67. Try again. Negative 67 plus the absolute value of 51. You have to take the absolute value first, which is 51. And we're adding negative 67. And again, this rule is who won? The negatives win by 16. So we have a negative 16. Negative 51 plus 45. Looks like a negative 6. Multiply them together. M times N times P, which is 15 times 5, which is 75. Square root of 14 plus 11 is the square root of 25, which is 5. Try and move it along here. 621 times h squared. Now that looks scary, but take a look. H is 0 squared, and the 0 gets squared, which is 0, times 621, which is 0. Negative 4 times x, which is 137, plus 709. In this particular case, you could grab a calculator, but it's good practice to try and multiply it in your head. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to write down the 8 and carry the 2 in my head. And the 12 gives me a 4 in my head, and carry the 1 and I get a 5. So 548 plus 709. Now, a lot of people wonder, how can you add these together or subtract them or look at the difference? Notice that the positives are bigger, and the difference is, well, the way I look at it is I need 52 to make this 600. So it looks like I need 152 plus 9 more makes 161. And it's positive. Now, just to double check before I write it down, since I'm in the challenge zone, 709, and we are going to subtract 548. 8 from 9 is 1, 4 from 10 is 6, and 5 from 6 is 1. 161, of course. T is 38. U is 2. And minus V. Notice that I have a double negative going on here. You have to square first, which is 4 times the 38. And that's 120 plus 32. I can write the plus 44 if I want to, because they're separated by addition or anyway, I have to do this multiplication first anyway, and then I'm going to add the 44. I could leave this as a negative double negative, or I can put a plus 44. Now what I'm doing here is I'm multiplying the 4 times the 30, which is 120, multiplying the 4 times the 8, which is 32, and adding them together, 152 plus 44. And when you add that, you get 196, and you're done. F plus G, and we're taking the absolute value. Both of these are positive, so it's not going to do anything. 191 plus 374. Absolute value has no effect on positives, but we want to put them in there anyway. So 191 and 374, lots of ways to do it. I'm just going to add them. I'm going to add the 1 plus the 4, which is 5, the 7 and the 9, which gives me 16, carry the 1, and 3 and 4. 3 plus 1 plus my carry gives me 565. If you want, you can write it on the side, 374, 191, and add them that way if you like. That is 5, 6, carry the 1, and that's 5. In some ways, it's almost faster to write it out than it is to do it in your head, but there it is. Never hurts to try it a couple of different ways. And it looks like we have 496, and we're done. Negative 1 squared isn't going to change anything because we're talking about 496 times 1, which is 496. Negative 3 times negative 65. Uh-oh. Not really negative 65. We've got an absolute value there, don't we? Plus the 756. Absolute value makes this positive 65. Be careful, you've got a negative 3 there. You cannot multiply the negative into the negative 65 here. You can't multiply these first. These absolute values behave like parentheses. You have to do what's inside first, which is to take the absolute value. Then you can do the multiplication. And hopefully you can see that it matters. If I multiply the 3 times the 6, 60, I get 180, and 15 makes 195. That's 180 plus 15, which gives me a negative 195 plus 756. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to do something in my head. I am going to subtract 200 from this, but add 5, because negative 200 plus 5 is the same as negative 195. It's easy to subtract 200 from this to give me 556 and add 5, which is 561. Now I could have done the subtraction and the carries and the borrows and all that, but I think it's easier to do it this way. Hopefully I didn't make a mistake. Know in a second. 2 times the absolute value of negative 126 plus 596. Oh, negative 596. That is a subtraction. I'm going to change it to adding the opposite. I have to take the absolute value first, which is 2 times 126 plus negative 596, or minus 596, same thing. That is 252 plus negative 596. The negatives win. Notice that the negatives are quite a bit bigger. In fact, they're bigger by negative 342, I believe. 44, sorry. Let's double check. 596, sure enough, negative 344. We've got t, which is 327. Be careful, they're out of order. Minus the absolute value of 181. This is one of those cases where you can't change this to adding the opposite because this absolute value has to be taken first. This is 327 minus 181. If you want, you can change it to plus a negative, or you can think of it as a subtraction. Again, I could do the 19 thing. Basically, I'm thinking of this as negative 200 plus 19, because I can subtract the 200 and get the 127, and then add the 19, which is going to be 146, I believe. But in this case, I'm going to go ahead and double check it. 327 minus 181. That is 6. 8 from 12 is 4. And 1 from 2 is 146. and 23 squared. 23 squared. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the FOIL method to do this. Most of you are aware that FOIL is first, outer, inner, last. And so I'm going to do it in my head, but let me write it out for you so you can see what I'm doing. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take the 400 and I'm going to add the 120 plus the 9. So what I'm doing is I'm saying, okay, so when you square this, you're multiplying it times itself. And I'm using the idea of FOIL. That's the 400. My inner two terms are 60 and 60, plus 60 plus 60. And then I'm adding the 3 times 3, which is the 9. So I add the 120 with the 400, which is 529. It just happens I have memorized the square of 23, but that's how to do a square if you haven't memorized it. So that's 529. And done. Yay, 20 minutes. Okay. Hope that helped a little bit. Hopefully you'll remember to always substitute inside parentheses and follow order of operations. Good luck, folks.